All right, everybody. This is Radeep Khan with Josiah Neely with Conversation number 49. And we're going to talk about several things. We'll talk about, we always deviate, but like this is our general plan. Talk about Catholic Protestant wars on social media, San Francisco and Silicon Valley, and why there will never be another, at least in the foreseeable future. And then Coldplay cheaters, which is the whole thing now. But that'll be in the paywall, so you know. But let's start with the Catholic Protestant thing. Josiah, you are a Roman Catholic, um, and I am not religious, but I do sometimes say things that indicate that I am a Catholic leaning person. On the other hand, we both grew up in the United States. You grew up evangelical. I did not, but we both grew up in a fundamentally Protestant country. So there's all sorts of like layers to this sort of discussion in America because, in America, a lot of Catholics would say even the Catholics are Protestant, which is not true literally of everybody, but a lot of Catholics are basically just, oh,
Right.
the same as Protestant, except they think the Pope is cool and have a have a different liturgy or have a liturgy. I mean,
Yeah.
the differences are minor, but this huge thing online, and it spread into the origin of the West and Mount Sinai and blah blah blah. It's just, I did complain in one of our group chats. It's like this is just like where blogs would be better because they're engaged in kind of like with arguments instead of just like explosions all over Twitter. And then you have a bunch of stupid people also jumping in, and then the smart people, and it's all like a kind of like an intellectual goulash. It's difficult to keep track of. So why don't you clue the listener and viewer in?
Yeah. And I will say before I give the backstory, you said that this would be better if it were a back and forth on blogs or whatnot, which seems reasonable. And then Park, one of the interlocutors in this debate, wrote like I don't know 5,000 6,000 words in for the tablet, on the subject, and I quickly realized I really don't want to read this either. It's like too much. Um, so the basic backstory is a few days ago now, maybe it was up to a week ago, Israel, the IDF was bombing some sort of targets in Gaza, and they mistakenly struck, I think, the only operating Catholic church that is in Gaza. And I think it was kind of one of those things where they hit something nearby and like shrapnel went over to the church or something. I don't think they actually a missile hit the church per se, but anyway, it was damaged and people were killed. The IDF, put out a statement saying that it happened, like it was a mistake and it was a tragedy. They regret the loss of life, etc. Um, Hope other people, put out a statement. All of that, I would say, is kind of par for the course. Uh, what made it into a online controversy, or at least extended the controversy beyond what would have just been a fairly typical Gaza war episode, was well, first I guess it was Joel Berry, who of the Babylon Bee, um wrote something that was, I don't I'm going to paraphrase, um I don't want to misstate, but it's basically, there's only hey look, there's only 200 Catholics in all of Gaza and they all support Hamas, and if you're a true Christian, you wouldn't be able to operate there because Hamas would like kill you or whatever. And it's just kind of like the undertone is, um I don't know, they had it coming, or maybe it's not such a big deal that they died because they have bad thoughts, presumably. Um, and so this obviously provoked a lot of backlash and back and forth, and then somehow this kind of evolved into a debate about, um, American versus other forms of Christianity, and some people were quite annoyed to be lectured about Christianity from people in the Middle East, um, who, despite the fact that, it has to be said, Christianity did originate in the Middle East. And I think while not explicitly about this, there definitely was undercurrent and implicit, sometimes explicit, to the disputes was Protestantism versus uh, other forms of Christianity, right? So I mean, like, this is a Catholic church, but obviously the Orthodox churches, it's the same deal there, perhaps even more so. Other churches that uh, you know differ from Protestantism in a lot of ways, and strangely, like, excuse me, the debate also seemed to like get caught up in with like American identity or whatever, which uh, I I don't like these debates. They kind of mutate over time, so I
I mean,
didn't.
this is why. Okay, like maybe not a 5,000 word thing, but just man, like if just people could have
Yeah,
500 words,
right,
because it's like
right.
the tracking is very difficult and it's very vague and like
Yeah, but someone was like,
subjective.
"Oh, well, American Protestantism has its own folkways." I'm like, "Okay." Like, what's that have to do with the IDF bombing a Catholic church in Gaza, Like, I mean, particularly and I mean, I will say, like, obviously, um, religion is a complex phenomenon, right? And it's tied up in culture and, like, the ethnos of different peoples in different ways, blah, 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 blah. But at the end of the day, if you're a Christian, right, like, fundamentally fundamentally, like, you're supposed to care about the truth of the religion, right? Like, there's something, because people were saying, like, "Oh, well, these forms of Christianity are, like, alien to America," or whatever, and I'm like, "Well, maybe that's true, maybe that's not true, but also, if you're a Christian, who cares, right? Like, what matters is it the right is it the true form of Christianity? And if the true form of Christianity is alien to America, then, that's a problem for America. That's not like that's not a reason to dismiss it." Uh, so I don't know. I like the whole thing. I will say, I'm pretty pro Israel. I would say I always have been. I'm not like super zealous about it, but I would say that I kind of see things from their point of view more often than not, or whatever. But this stuff, like the Joel Berry and Park, is it McDonald's? Yeah, Park McDonald.
McDougal, but yeah.
McDougal. Okay, yeah, it's like it's not McDonald. It's something like McDonald. Um, okay, yeah, so it's like Scottish, right? I guess not. Yeah. Um, but anyway, like they uh in my mind are doing like more effective pro anti-Israel advocacy than anything, Mehdi Hassan or Zoran or any other anti-Israel activist could do, just in terms of alienating people with their attitude about this, which is not even like the IDF is not taking this attitude, so it seems like a problem. I think it's a bigger long term problem if like this is the attitude people are going to take. I think they are ultimately going to end up alienating more and more Americans, especially on the right.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many places to go with it. I mean, part of my frustration is, as some of like I actually take a pretty deep interest in the history of Christianity, and
Right.
so it's just like I'm like, oh, okay, well, maybe they'll like have some discussion about, the rehebraization of some Sabbatarianism, the
Yeah.
Judaizers, and it's like no, it's just like a huge food fight,
Right.
and it's just like okay, like you're all supposedly believing that Jesus Christ came. I mean, and
Right.
like you guys are like yelling at each other about these like irrelevant things, And like
Well,
it's just like
hardly new to the history of Christianity,
yeah, I
as
mean,
you know.
but it's just like, it's like clapback culture, It's
Yeah,
like, I don't wanna hear from anyone named Khalil. Well, Khalil was, worshiping, our Lord when your ancestors were, like, jumping
right,
around like a
right.
fire. I'm like, "Okay." It's like, "Okay, this is infantile, this is juvenile." So that was, like, one thing that I was thinking. Another thing is, it's like there's multiple things that are true here that are in tension. Like, one like famous story that I always remember reading. I think it was like forget which book it was. It's a pretty famous book about Orthodox Christians in the Middle East from like right around 9/11. And one of the stories in the early prologue of the book
This
is how
Dalrymple book,
it might have been the Dalrymple book, but basically it's some American evangelicals. And these should not be people that are commenting online. So hopefully, like this is not. But like they'll go to Jerusalem, they'll see clearly someone that looks like an Arab to them with a cross, and they'll ask them when they became Christian. And it's just like that really pisses Middle Eastern Christians off.
I'm sure.
And so, like, obviously, like, they have, like, a negative like, in terms of interpersonal, I don't think this is, like, the, well-educated seminary or anything like that, but, like, the average American evangelical Protestant kinda has a vague awareness that there are Christians in the Middle East, but since they are not so these are mostly Orthodox Christians or they're Oriental Orthodox, which is totally different. So they're not interacting with these people, especially if they're Baptist. Like maybe if they're Anglican, there's like some contact, there's things that are going on. And so they have no institutional connection. And, they even try to convert
Right,
uh, Orthodox and Catholic Christians in the Middle East to evangelical Protestantism. And so there's this tension there that causes, frankly, interpersonal beef. And then it erupts, and then they give all these other reasons. Well, actually, it's because and I'm like, no, you just don't like each other because there's some history here over the last like century and a half or so of like European extraterritoriality, and I mean. Europeans have been, in some ways, they've been protectors of Christians, right? But American evangelical Protestants, in particular, have had kind of a somewhat ambivalent relationship to some of these older Christian groups that they perceive to have like gone beyond primitive Christianity, primal Christianity.
right.
So, the American attitude, a lot of the American evangelical Protestant attitude, which is like a very, very specific radical Reformation thread, which is not even like true of Northern European Protestants, is you read the Bible,
Right.
that's your Christianity. Whereas if you're like, a Christian from the ancient traditions. It's like it's not just the Bible, it's the liturgy, it's the churches, it's the history, it's the church fathers, and literally some of the church fathers. I mean, most of the church fathers, doctors of the church, are from the Eastern Mediterranean or the Levant and that area. So again, when someone like Park is trying to say like, well, we have our own folk ways, it's just like, okay, like who the fuck are you kidding? Like, it's like
I know.
your church is like built on like the ideas of us. Like without
Right.
us there would be. I think that's their I'm just like trying to channel. I think like the attitude, like why they act like cuz like the reaction is like frankly like pretty immature, but it's coming from a place like who the fuck are you kidding? Have you read the New Testament? Like who are these people and what are their names? Like this is
Right.
like it's just on the face of it seems like a kind of like dumb assholey like I've had good interactions with Park, so this is like not personal, but just if I was them, I'd be like fucking pissed off. So now you've elevated it. Like it's not what you're saying. Like it's creating like animus where there doesn't need to be animus.
Yeah. Yeah, I there is, I will say there is this kind of attitude sometimes that you find in certain parts of evangelical Christianity, um, and I think this is probably apocryphal, um, but I do remember my mom one time saying that she was in a Christian bookstore and was talking with someone there about translations of the Bible, right? Like which translation or whatnot. And according to the story, the woman was like, "Well, look, if the King James Bible was good enough for the apostles, it's good enough for me, right?" So okay, all right. Did that actually happen, or is it just like kind of a joke? I don't know, but it's a joke about a certain attitude of I would say this, for myself, um, I grew up evangelical, Bible believing Christian or whatever. And I semi fell away for a time where it wasn't that I no longer believed. In fact, if you asked me, I would have said I believed all the same things, but I didn't practice it at all. I didn't go to church and any stuff like that. So when I when I when I decided I wanted to start going to church again, but I was a little disaffected from the evangelical milieu or whatever. I decided, I was like, well, I think I'm going to go back to the origins of Christianity. I'll try and go back to the very beginning. And so I started going to a Lutheran church, right? Because in my mind, it's like, well, it didn't go any farther back than Martin Luther, 1,500 years or so after the death of Christ. So there is that kind of like implicit attitude, I would say. It doesn't help that, yeah, I mean, when you do encounter Eastern Christians, like in the Middle East or whatever, they have a lot of beliefs, practices, attitudes, other stuff that is just very alien. I even think I remember I was reading, I forget the book, but it was about the Crimean War, back in the 1850s or whatever, um, which, as you know, originally started out as a conflict over, Russia trying to claim rights over holy sites in Palestine to protect pilgrims or whatever. But interesting. So this was in the 19th century, and the British at that time, uh, according to this book, kind of felt more sympathy with the Muslims than with the Christians, because the Muslims, I mean, they did not, they were not Christian, right? They had a different religion, but it was there were some uh, broad similarities with the more Puritan type, austere book, scripture based, not a lot of, whereas the Eastern Christians, I mean, they were all about their icons and their incense. And I think there were like whirling dervishes, or I don't know, but there was like liturgical, there was dancing and ceremony, all this stuff, like the beards, all this stuff that was just like, whoa. So even though theologically they should have been much closer with them than with the Muslims, they just didn't, they felt kind of alienated from that. And I think there's a little element of that now, even before you get into the whole um Israel thing, because I think the implicit American attitude is that it's like the Arab Israeli conflict, right? And Arab is, while if you ask somebody, they will concede that Arab is not the same as Muslim. They kind of equate the two, right? It's like, okay, there's Israel, and then the people around them are like Muslims who don't like them, and the existence of these Christian communities or whatever, who sometimes, I mean, you know, uh, have a similar, I would say, the Christian communities are in kind of like a weird position, because they're often, I mean, they're not treated very well by the Muslim nations or groups. Um, and they're a little bit alienated from it to that extent, but they also are not necessarily such big fans of Israel either. And in a lot of cases have kind of some similar attitudes, I would say, in terms of, their reaction to the conflict or whatever. Maybe, I mean, not expressed the same way. It's complicated. Lebanon, right? You have, obviously it was the Christians who invited Israel into the war, the civil war there in Lebanon, right? So there's more diversity, but they don't have the same attitudes that like American Christians have about the conflict. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So the so this is why Twitter doesn't work. So, like, let's talk about Lebanon, for example. in Lebanon, there's multiple Christian groups actually, but the two dominant ones, like the overwhelming majority, are the Maronites,
Right.
who are in communion with the Roman Catholic Church.
Right.
This happened in the medieval period, during the Crusades. They, well,
They're
I'm
in
not gonna.
communion, but they are also their
They
own.
have their own traditions.
Yeah.
Like they're recognizably, so that's why they're not like Roman Catholic Lebanese, right? Like they have their own liturgy, their own traditions that the Roman Catholic Church accepts, just like the Eastern
Correct.
Unionite churches, whatever.
Yes.
Okay, but then there's Orthodox Christians in Lebanon, of whom, say, for example, Nassim Taleb is one. Okay, these
Right.
Orthodox Christians, also called like Melkites, I think, but basically they are aligned with Constantinople.
Yeah.
Okay, so the Eastern Orthodox is their overall alignment in terms of institutions of theology. The Orthodox Christians in Lebanon traditionally are much more Arab nationalist than the Maronites, who consider themselves like phony. They have like other ideas. Okay,
Right.
my only point here is like there are Christians in Lebanon who are totally alienated from Israel, and then there are other Christians in Lebanon who are like, okay, well, they're another religious minority, and there's various cultural reasons based on like where the Orthodox Christians have lived. They're like way more integrated among like Muslim Arabs in like northern coastal Lebanon than the Maronites who lived on their mountain, kind of segregated like the Druze. Okay,
Right.
and so like these sort of like sociological have nothing to do, as you say, with the truth of Christianity and with the theology, um, shape their views, and then like it comes into conflict, or like it intersects with American Christianity, where it is fundamentally like a fact that there have been philo-Semitic strains in Christianity periodically,
Yeah.
and it's supposedly like pro-Jewish is a way to think about it, although there's arguments. But basically, let's just call it philo-Semitic, and that actually took its logical, probably extreme, in radical American Reformation Protestantism, which is expressed as, say, evangelicals, to some extent mainline, although they've been turning away from that. And that's very different from Christianity in Europe, arguably,
Yeah.
and in the Middle East, right? And so, I think maybe part of the problem is some evangelicals are saying, well, I mean, this is really what the religion should be. You guys have like fallen away. Again, going back to,
Right.
we are primitive Christians, and we do
Yeah.
baptism like the early church and all this stuff. And you're smiling. I don't know why, but like maybe you can say something about that.
Well,
But anyway,
I mean,
but I'm not wrong, right? Like that's this is the attitude that they're
I
coming in with,
understand.
which they don't want to say it sometimes because it's kind of dickish, but that is what really they're thinking.
I mean, I will say, this is my attitude. I know a lot of people don't have this attitude. Uh, I don't like. I don't mind them saying it if that's what they believe. I don't like. For example, you were talking earlier about um people get upset that evangelical Christians go in to the Middle East and try and convert, Catholic or Orthodox Christians there to evangelical, Christianity or whatever. And I mean, from my perspective, it's like, well, if they didn't do that, like, I mean, if they believe what they claim to believe, they ought to do that. You know what I mean? So I don't like. I almost. I will. I even. I will say, uh, to a certain extent, even like outright anti-Catholicism, like if you are a Lutheran or a Calvinist or something like that, and you believe and you're like out, if you're saying, well, I think that like uh the Roman Catholic Church is the whore of Babylon or whatever, right? It's like, okay, I mean, to some extent, I view that as, I mean, it's like, I think obviously I think that's wrong. But I view it as almost kind of a positive signal to this extent, is that it means that like you really believe what you claim to believe. Whereas if you are you know, someone who says that they're part of that tradition, but you're like all nicey about everything, then I don't know, like, do you really believe what you're saying? Right? So that part I don't have a problem with that. I do have a problem. I mean, I will say, you know, to be similarly frank with my brothers in Christ, I mean, a lot of this stuff, these strains of Protestantism are pretty ahistorical. They don't bear up to a lot of scrutiny. I will say, like as a former evangelical. I mean, many of my family members are still in that, so I don't mean any disrespect to them, but like a lot of stuff, it doesn't bear scrutiny. And I do wonder sometimes if some of the hostility is beyond just the differences themselves, but maybe it arises out of a bit of insecurity, in that deep down you do know that, like, they know that the Middle Eastern Christians were there first, right? They know that they have a kind of claim to historical authenticity, which um is difficult for someone who says, well, it's just, we just read the Bible and, it all falls out, and it just happens to look like some sort of mega church. I mean, not Joel Osteen, because a lot of people don't like that, but Billy Graham, right? It just happens to look like Billy Graham. So I wonder if some of that, if some of this is like there's an undercurrent of hostility, is that it's kind of an embarrassment, that there are these ancient Christian communities and they don't look like Baptists, right? Um, I don't know.
Yeah, I think it is interesting, because some of the arguments that I've seen are basically like, well, like, so there's one argument, for example, that Middle Eastern, like, so for Oriental Orthodoxy, which usually rejects Chalcedon, so it's like a separate stream from Orthodox and Roman Catholic. Like the
Yeah,
Coptic Church, the Jacobite Church in Syria, and the Armenian churches, right? And like I've seen some Protestants say before, well, the problem with that type of Christianity is like these are ethnic churches, and like one detail that's important to note in that is actually a lot of the early theologians in that tradition were actually Greek speakers. First of all,
right,
so
right,
they weren't originally ethnic churches. But the second issue is the people that are saying this might be, I don't know, evangelical Lutherans of the Missouri Synod,
yeah. Right.
which is mostly German. I mean, it's always interesting to me where I see these because I'm not like a participant, and then I'm just like, wait, you just said something about them that's just trivially obvious, also true about you. Like, are you just so unable to think outside of your box that you can't see that? And the fundamental reality is like sometimes that is clearly the case, Um, I mean, I think like we've been kind of, I don't want to say crappy on, but like, being like sympathetic to the Middle Eastern Christians a little bit. I think it's easy to be sympathetic to them because they are literally underdogs. I mean, the stuff that they go through, everyone, we don't need to like review it, but the diminitude under Islam and even today,
Yeah.
they are subject to a lot of persecution. And then the fact that like they get frankly caught in the crossfire between Muslim fundamentalists, like, these like Hamas and then Israel, like it just really sucks because it's a sucky situation.
Yeah.
Um, but also I would say that I think that, and I don't know, maybe I don't know them well enough. I don't know people from, I mean, I know people from that background, but American Protestantism in the last couple of centuries has been a force to defend Christians all around the world. It's not like it's
Right.
exclusively an invidious force or some like Arvista that like doesn't have any access to and American Protestants and like early Protestants as a whole, like they retranslated the Bible, they went back to the sources, Hebrew. And so there's a high intellectual tradition actually within Protestantism that doesn't often, I mean, for various reasons, it doesn't get highlighted. Often they tend to be reformed, Calvinist, and some of them actually, like, there is a pathway to the Eastern Christianity, to like Eastern Orthodoxy in particular, from some of these Protestants. That's like separate from the people like you who convert to Roman Catholicism. We know some of them, but it's interesting because some of the because Protestantism comes out of Catholicism. There is no Orthodox Protestantism, you know, and so it comes out of Catholicism, and then some of the people loop back to the Eastern churches, which the Orthodox and the Catholic accept each other's baptism. I think like the Catholic Church accepts baptism now in the Oriental Orthodox churches too, right?
Yeah, I mean, we accept it in the Protestant churches as well, as long as
Yeah,
it's Trinitarian in form. Uh,
yeah, yeah.
so yeah,
And so that includes pretty much everybody except for like Jehovah Witness and a few other people,
yeah,
So so I think like I think that this for me it I do like am interested sometimes in the drama and some of the conflict, but also like it's a way to like talk about like interesting things and kind of like flesh out, intellectual history and how people relate to each other, but instead I see people screaming. And so Josiah Lippincott, who came on this podcast, and I have to say, like, his Twitter personality is very different than he is like on podcast or even in real life. I saw him at the pastor's press party in January, so just I'm gonna bracket that out. But he basically, I mean, I did retweet it because it was just like I'm actually gonna I'm gonna say some of it because like it's just like what the hell. I think he's Catholic. I think he's Catholic, but um the stuff that he says is just like uh, I don't know, like so I don't know, like he yeah, it's like very inflammatory, like very amusing, but where is he? Where is he? I gotta see. It's like it's basically like attacking. It's not attacking, but it's like making almost like mocking the Old Testament. And again, he's really into Greece as the foundation of the West.
Right.
And so like this is like a little off topic, but I want to um. So he's saying, okay, so this is his conclusion. Okay, he says a lot before this. Western civilization began in ancient Greece, you idiot. The Torah is fundamentally Eastern book. Science, nature, and philosophy are unknown to it. Christianity, by contrast, is a Western religion. In Aquinas, for instance, you see a serious attempt to grapple with the distinction between knowledge and faith. Okay, so what the hell? I mean, I think he means Western Christianity because, like, I don't know if you could tell Armenians that, that their religion is not Christianity. It's like stuff like this is like,
Yeah.
okay, like I can see why people are getting aggravated because like there's just so much there to engage with, but not like necessarily in a positive way. And I kind of tend to agree that if you look at the older layers of the Hebrew Bible in particular, it is definitely quite different from what you see in Greek philosophy. Um, but you know, people are pointing out correctly, look, we're all human, and like I think this is the argument that I have with like Josiah, the other Josiah,
Right.
um,
Yeah.
is like he talks about the Greeks like they're like sui generis, like there's no one else like them, but like
Right.
you know, Abraham haggles with God and questions God in the Old Testament. It's like a big thing in there. Now it's not quite like the Greeks. Obviously, and the Greeks, I do think I kind of agree with Josiah that we should probably say the Greeks are special in a very particular way. I'll agree more with Josiah than with like Joel Berry, who just tweeted out, "Western civilization began at Mount Sinai." Okay, that's kind of a troll, in my opinion. It's defensible, and a lot of Jews actually do say that, but I think they say it frankly for, they're Jewish. They're gonna like,
Yeah.
whatever. Like, okay? But I mean, it's like stuff like that. Like, I don't know like where to go with that because like it's like clothed in intellectual arguments, but it just seems like you're just throwing punches and seeing where they hit. I don't know. It's not very Christian. I mean, I think Josiah is Christian. I think that Josiah is Christian. But if I read some of the tweets, I would think he was a neo pagan or something.
Right.
That's what I'm saying.
Hmm.
And so
Yeah.
I don't know
Well,
like,
I
what's
mean,
going on with that.
Christianity, like the influences of Athens and Jerusalem and what they have to do with each other has been a matter of debate for almost as long as there has been Christianity, and probably the same goes for Western civilization. What do you even? I mean, I think there is an argument that kind of Christianity is constitutive of Europe and European civilization to a certain extent. Um, Obviously, would have to be very nuanced about that because you have ancient Greece, you have Rome, you have other stuff. But I don't know. Like, I think, as you say, this probably is something where certainly it's not well suited to a discussion on Twitter or X or social media. um, in terms of like trying to suss out, well, what are the comparative origins and mixings of like Plato versus King Solomon, right? In terms of
Yeah.
Moses. Like there's some like definitely some more philosophical stuff that's in the Old Testament. Uh, but it's also a different book, and like what you even consider Like, how far west does the West go? Is a question that I know has been debated.
Well, so our friend John Durant, tweeted out just kind of as a troll, but funny because he's writing a book on. I think I can say this. He's 'cause he's told a bunch of people he's writing a book on religion and the biblical text and all this stuff. And he said, Western civilization basically began with Zoroastrian Persians, and interacted with their allies, the Jews, and their enemies, the Greeks, and that gets at the fact that there has within Judaism itself there's a substantial Zoroastrian, there's a Persian influence, due to the Babylonian exile.
Right.
I think actually exploring these is actually pretty interesting, and it's actually more interesting than say the West began in the Agora in Athens or the West began on Mount Sinai. Like those are kind of like
Right.
provocative, kind of retarded things to say, to be honest.
Yeah.
But the smart thing is actually to follow up and just think about it, and like the very process of thinking about it and understanding it in a critical, rational way. That is what is Western is what I would say. So we've been talking about that for a while. I think we hit most of the topics. Is there anything else you wanted to say about this?
No, I think that's
Yeah.
that's fine. Oh, well, there is one other thing that kind of uh, veers off of it a little bit, which it has to do with you know, attitudes, changing attitudes in America, especially young people, especially on the right, to Israel and to the conflict. And historically, America has been very pro-Israel. It's been kind of like a bipartisan issue. It's never been lockstep uniform. There's always been more Israel skeptical people, both on the right and on the left. Particularly, I mean, it's waxed and waned, I would say. But n- now, one thing that I find interesting, and I saw recently, someone had done a poll asking Americans. And actually, this wasn't even about Israel. This was, do you have a favorable or unfavorable opinion of the Jews, right, or of Jewish people? And it's broken down by age, and basically, among senior American seniors, boomers, and more, basically almost everybody's got a favorable opinion of the Jews. I think unfavorable is less than 5%, something like that. But then as you get younger, it kind of goes up and up and up to the point where for Zoomers, maybe around a quarter, maybe around 25% of Americans will tell pollsters they have an unfavorable opinion of the Jews. And there is a bit of a partisan divide. I would say, young Republicans are less friendly, favorably disposed by a couple points than young Democrats in terms of their attitudes towards Jewish people. But so there is that, but that's dwarfed by just the age effect. So this makes me wonder. I do think, and some of that is probably demographics, right? Uh, but and there's probably other reasons why you could say that that's happening as well. But it does make me think that as we go forward, not tomorrow, probably not even 5 years from now, but at some point, the overall attitude of America towards the Israel question is probably going to change, right? And it's not, I should say, like 20, you also see similar things if you ask about Israel in polling, where, older Americans are much more pro Israel and younger Americans less so. And it's never, I don't think you ever get to the point where even young Americans are overwhelmingly pro-Palestine. Let's say, if you identify it that way, Israel versus Palestine, but they're much more ambivalent. They're much more split about it. Americans in general, I would say, are much more split about it, and that's just going to continue, I would say, and that's going to have all sorts of interesting ramifications for how we view the conflict and what we do in terms of the Middle East and other stuff like that.
Yeah, one thing I will say is, yeah, that's all true. I also remember that like, I don't follow it too closely. I just remember thinking the Obama administration, there was some beef between Obama and Israel, but, like, Netanyahu really, really pushed it visible into the public, and I thought at the time, actually, that was pretty bad for Israel over the long term because it's making it into a politically polarized issue, you
Right.
know?
Right.
And when it becomes a politically polarized issue, then it just, like, splits and, the 2 parties do alternate in power.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, Biden was very pro-Israel, but Biden's also paleo Democrat. The
Yes.
next Democratic president is going to be a lot less pro-Israel, quite clearly.
Unless it's federal.
Obama and Clinton were already more Israel skeptical, arguably, than Biden. You know, but so this is they're gonna this is the new reality they're gonna have to deal with, and they have to thank like Netanyahu. I think Netanyahu, like clearly, he was focusing on short-term upside, which there was.
Right.
But it kind of like the long-term, capital of goodwill definitely disappeared. Okay, so let's talk about Silicon Valley. I went to San Francisco, as I often do, this weekend for Open Source, a conference in tech. And a friend of ours, a mutual. I mean, you don't know him that well, but you know who this is, just in terms of our social circle. A young man, he just turned 26, I think. He's lived in Austin for 5 years, has a couple successful startup that he exited and looking for new projects. And I ran into him at like, a social event and I saw him. I'm like, oh, and he was there with his longtime girlfriend. And I was like, oh, what's going on? And he's like, oh, I'm moving to SF. And this is a guy who's from, I'll say he's from the Southeast. I don't want to like dox him or whatever. I don't know what that means, but he's from the Southeast. He's not from Austin. He's from further east. So he's a Southern person.
Yeah.
And, he's pretty big on Austin for a while, in the tech scene and then he moved when he moved, he was in SF because he was between startups, and Mark Andreessen apparently came up to him and was like, "Oh, like what are you doing?" And he had was talking about these ideas, and then he was like, "Oh, great." And he's like, "So where in the Bay do you live?" And he's like, "Oh, I live in Austin." And Andreessen was like, "What are you doing with your life?" And walked off. It's like,
Uh-huh.
um,
Right.
so the issue is Mark Andreessen is conservative or he's a Republican or whatever, tech right, whatever. He's not a lib, but basically you have to be in the Bay Area when you're of a certain age, and you have a certain kind of energy and a certain type of audacity. And Hayes Valley if you're in AI, South Bay if you want to do more hardware stuff. That's fundamental truth. My whole adult life that I've noted that I've like paid attention to these issues. They've talked about the next Silicon Valley, the Silicon Alley, the Silicon Forest. The Silicon Swamp. I don't know what the Silicon what. We live in Austin. There's a fair amount of tech stuff. There's a lot. There's an Apple thing here, and there's Google, and obviously Gigafactory and Tesla. Texas is a very pro business state. It's great. We do have like a lot of great tech workers. Yet the reality is, it's just not the same caliber. Everyone knows that. The density is lower. It's a smaller pond, and the quality of fish is not as great. And this is no shade on all of my other friends in tech. In Austin, it's just like let's just be real about this. Be realists, and we want to get the best people. There's people like Joe Lonsdale who came here, and Elon, obviously. But a lot of the top level people that come here, they're more mid career. They're more like the middle of
Right.
their lifespan, and they want to settle down and establish roots in Texas. And they go back and forth all the time. But if you are 21 years old, what are you doing in Austin, Texas? And not San Francisco if you're, trying to do a startup. That's the question. So, we have like a couple of $1 billion in VC investing, whereas like San Francisco's got 90 billion. That's the
Yeah.
number I was quoted. That might be a little extreme, but and this is again not to throw shade on Austin. I think Austin has a great future. I've lived here the most that I have in my whole life, and I'm part of the scene, and I'm a big booster of Texas for various reasons. But the reality is, no matter how horribly the Bay is run, no matter how horribly the governance is in California, um, there's only like one world class tech city in the world on the human species, and that is San Francisco, the Bay Area. And I think it might just indicate a limitation on human capital and returns to agglomeration, and how like you just get these equilibrium. And like as someone that's more small government oriented, that would like to have more order. I'm not a big fan of the fact that this has to be in San Francisco. The weather could even be better. It could be in San Diego, but it's in San Francisco. It's just what it is for various historical reasons. And I think we're stuck with it. And I don't want to read about any more stories about the next Silicon Valley because we have one and we need to figure out how to make do with it. And optimize it, and deal with California's government. Dan Luria, the new mayor, is way better than London Breed.
Yeah.
London Breed, and I think it's because London Breed was captured, not because she was actually very ideological. So Yeah, that's my opinion on that sort of thing. I think it's important for America. We got these big tech companies. It drives exports. It drives innovation. It drives creativity. And obviously, both of us are more on the right. But the reality is, I think we just acknowledge the truth of what is dynamism in this country, and it is in this extremely liberal city and area.
Yeah. I mean, I think it does go to show just how powerful network effects can be. I mean, like how important it is if you're a smart person, technology oriented, to be around other smart technology oriented people and where all the money is and jobs and so on and so forth. I do think, I mean, I will say, I think there was a period. I mean, you said like no matter how bad the government in San Francisco gets, it's just not going to change. I There was a period, I would say, from like 2020 through 2022 where, I mean, things had gotten bad enough that you did start to see an exodus, right? This is part of why people started writing these pieces about Austin as the new Silicon Valley, is because you did have a significant number of people who jumped ship, and there was start there was, it seemed to me, the beginnings of like a potential shift of the center of gravity away from San Francisco between pandemic stuff, crime and homelessness, woke insanity, all this sort of, stuff. But my interpretation of what happened is that the governments there saw what was happening and they kind of reversed course a little bit, right? I mean, you definitely have seen that in San Francisco, uh, in terms of cleaning up homelessness, dealing with crime, other stuff like that. The pandemic era stuff kind of went away on its own. Some of the woke stuff, I would have to imagine San Francisco is probably still a pretty woke place, but it's probably, I don't know, 10, 15%, maybe 20% less intense. And that's all you need, to not only stop the bleeding, but actually reverse somewhat some of these effects, right? So this is, I think, part of the. It's not that there's nothing that San Francisco or California could do that would kill the goose that lays the golden egg, but if they start to go over the line, because it's so important for them, chances are they're gonna like kind of pull back. They're not gonna let it. They're not gonna let it go for long enough that they would need to actually destroy Silicon Valley. So, uh, it doesn't. I mean, that's not a certainty. There have been. Um, I mean, Detroit was. I mean, it was never a tech hub, but Detroit was once the great American manufacturing city, and so on and so forth. And they let that basically be destroyed, right? For various reasons. So, it could happen on the flip side. There was a period of time where probably if you were to look at Detroit and New York City, and both of them seem to be in irreversible decline. And if you were to say, hey, one of these cities is going to come back and one isn't, it wouldn't be obvious that it was going to be New York City. But they, again, decided that, you know what, we've had enough. Um, let's see, we'll even elect Republicans for a little while. That's how bad things have gotten, right? Um, so yeah, so I think when you are number one, it's actually, you don't have to do much in order to hold on to being number one in this sort of case, and as long as you're not a total idiot, you can do it, right? You can do it. So probably San Francisco will remain, Silicon Valley will remain, at least until it transfers to China or something like that.
I mean, one thing is I wonder about, you're talking about Detroit, but like think about like some place like Rochester, Kodak,
Yeah,
city. It has a lot of stuff going for it.
yeah,
I do wonder if the returns. This is one of my reasons I'm pretty pro urbanist in some ways. Is I think the returns to agglomeration are getting bigger.
yeah,
Um, and so in the past there could have been multiple Silicon Valleys, and there kind of were. Um, but now I think and this is ironic in the cyber age, you can email anyone.
Right,
But
right.
there's something about being together in person in these like extemporaneous conversations, and also just like when everyone can talk to you, no one can talk to you.
Mm, mhm.
You know, everyone can email you. No one, you don't read any of the emails. So
Right.
being in person, you just there's a um um yeah, I think you need to do something. I mean, I think it's very awkward, or not very awkward. It's a little awkward sometimes, like those of us on the right who promote um well, I mean, because there's 2 things I'm gonna say. One thing is, obviously, we promote, like, Texas, it's a pro-growth state, I love this, like, I promote it, like, on my social media, everyone knows. I mean, I don't think Texas has the most beautiful environment, there's a lot of things that are
Right.
problems with it, but you know what? Like, we promote growth, we promote building. I think it's great that houses are getting cheaper in Austin and people are still moving here. People are moving to Dallas, Houston, San Antonio. It's like, I believe in 1,000,000,000 Texans. No, just a joke. But we could have 1,000,000,000 Texans. You know, the fact is, there's just great things on the coasts, and like I go there all the time, and Mike Cernovich, right wing guy, he loves living in Orange County. There's great things. Everyone's gone to SoCal, like loves SoCal. Even though there's a lot of bad things about it, we just
Yeah.
need to be a little honest about it. And some of this is history. Some of this is, there are downsides to growth, and character does matter. I think it matters less, but I just want to acknowledge that it's a thing.
Right.
Um, and so we need to acknowledge another issue is I do worry a little bit about and like for my other podcast, I did a recording with Jason Richwine of the Center for Immigration Studies, I think, and then I'm going to do with Alex Norestra, who's like pro-immigration from Cato. But I do
Did
think
you
a
not
lot. What?
did you not I'm getting
Couple of years ago, it was a couple of years ago though.
okay,
So
alright.
I'm doing a follow up. I like to talk. I like to like I like to talk to them both of them at the same time, or like around the same time.
Yes, right.
So, but I do think we need to like fix aspects of our immigration system, but returns to agglomeration in these big cities. Um, I think it's good to have like all the smartest people in the world in the United States rather than elsewhere. Because like the people who are like, the anti-immigration people that are like, we're like brain draining Nigeria. That's bad for Nigeria. I'm like, you don't give a fuck about Nigeria. You don't give a fuck. Let's just have a real discussion about the real issues and not like the,
Right,
the fake stuff.
right.
Um, and I love JD, but like, he like wants to revitalize small town America. And I'm like, no, I don't want to revitalize small town America. I want small town America to be what it is, which is mostly for old people, you know? And like young people mostly move to the bigger cities or the urban areas. Now that does have it has dysgenic anti-natalist effects. I want to fix that, okay? But like contrary to my friend Dan Hess at More Birth, I mean, Israel shows that you can live in apartments in like a dense country and still have, even among secular Israelis, above replacement fertility, right? We need to be creative and figure things out because more space. I support that too. Actually, I support exurbs. I support suburbs. I support walkable cities. I support it all. Everything, we should have it all, but we just need to have a discussion about these sorts of things. On our side, I think because I think we don't appreciate agglomeration of these like creative liberal cities. I don't think the cities are necessarily creative because they're super liberal. I think somewhat liberal, to be fair, but like New York City in like 2010 shows you a well-ordered city. It was
Right.
very creative, very economically dynamic, and it was very safe. It was great. It was a professional upper middle class playground.
Mhm.
That's what I want
Yeah,
for me and
yeah,
my friends. You know.
yeah. One thing, it's a couple of I had something I was gonna say, but it just, like, shot out of my brain as I thought. One thing that I don't know why this is, if this has been studied, so on and so forth, but something that I have found is when I go to various cities, like I was in Indianapolis last week, but this is what I'm about to say is also true for DC. It's true for other places. Um, okay, it's not surprising that different parts of the city of a city, you have some areas that are just really nice, and some areas that are kind of run down, and you have areas that are, different demographics, racially or age wise, or so on and so forth. But one thing that I noticed is just like how abruptly the change will happen, you know? So, for example, when I was in Indianapolis last week, I wanted to get some ice cream, at like one evening. So I was like, I plugged in my phone, and the nearest ice cream place was like 3/4 of a mile walking, 20-minute walk, something like that. So I was like, okay, well, whatever. I got nothing else to do. I'll just walk it. So I walked it. And what I noticed is, I started out, I'm like next to the hotel and I'm walking, and there's just there's a block or two where everybody is black, right? And then I take a corner, I go up one block, and all of a sudden, and I would say like they're black, and it's very it's not age stratified, it's like there's older people, there's younger people, so on and so forth. But, it's like 90, 95% black. Okay, so then I take a left, I go a block or just a block or two away, and all of a sudden, like everybody's young, um, racially, like it's white Asian, basically, the mix, It's like it's a yuppie, it's a
Wusion.
Fusion, yeah, yeah, right. Dynamic, and this is, of course, where the ice cream shop is or whatever. Um, and so this is I mean, it's just like a weird somehow it's not like there's some sort of force field or, anything, that's separating this. Is like anybody could walk. I walked through it, right? So you can walk like, people can walk one block one way or one block another way. Um, but it looks almost like you're in, uh, you know, um a different city or yeah, like so this is something that I don't understand about cities is how like how these distinctions get maintained so starkly, right? Where it could be just like, oh, well, you step across this intersection and suddenly you're in a different part of town, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, this is totally makes sense, and I mean, so in American culture, um, oh, okay. So first of all, I'm gonna go back to San Francisco because I think this important needs to be said. You know, my friend is trying to move to San Francisco, and he's talking about where to move, and he's like, "Oh, I don't want to be around like the city has this feces on the street." A lot of that's around Market Street, Soma, downtown. In like the northeast part of the city. Even if you go to say like Columbus Street, North Beach, it starts to get nicer. I don't know why. Just the insane people are not there.
Yeah.
Most of the city is actually totally fine. To be honest, it's very concentrated, and so those who know. I mean, Noe Valley is like super nice. A little further away, Hayes Valley is where a lot of it's a little dirtier, but it's where a lot of the AI companies are. A lot of young people are. So I know the city pretty well now because I just go a lot. I lived in Berkeley for a while, so whatever. In America, part of it is due to crime. Frankly, a lot of it's due to black crime. I'm just gonna say it because whatever. It's 2025. We can say it, and people just try to avoid that, and they kind of know, and they have like euphemisms.
Right.
I mean, of like what they say, like sketchy neighborhood or
Yeah.
neighborhood without good schools. I don't know, like whatever they say. But that's an issue. But you just kind of know, and it's just like a totally different culture, and that's just how it is. And Europeans come, they don't know because they're just like, well, I mean, this is all flat. Like,
Right.
there's no, like you're on a. So it's like the issue is like European cities, like maybe they grew up a little organically, and they did.
Right.
It's okay. You see, like, oh, it's on the other side of the hill and stuff like that.
Right.
It's not like that. It's just like,
It's a grid. Yeah.
yeah, and it's like 8 Mile Road.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
And it's like you cross the road. It's like, wait, what there's like an invisible line here.
Uh-huh.
And I don't really know how. Sometimes it's just like self sorting and stuff like that. But yeah, and like the weird thing is,
'Cause I was thinking,
these little,
if you wanna
yeah,
mug I mean, just in my mind, if you wanna mug somebody, you can go up 2 blocks, right? And they're probably gonna have a lot more money, you know? But
yeah.
maybe I'm sure there's other factors like
Wait, but the police are keeping
yes.
track of certain
Right.
blocks
Yeah,
and
yeah,
not others. And that's fundamentally a lot of the story of the last like decade and like the rise of social justice, blah blah blah, is depolicing happened
yeah.
and repolicing never happened, and that's one reason you still have elevated rates in certain areas.
Right, right.
And it had a bad effect. It's like unrelated. We didn't talk about it. It's like it had a bad effect on the communities that like it was supposed to protect.
Yeah.
Just a fundamental reality, because people like us, we know which areas to live in and whatever. We have the resources, et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't. It's all kind of theoretical for us.
Yeah.
Whereas like if you're like a working lower class person, like this is like your life, your